financial literacy, and the human condition. Welcome to Financial Fitness with the Money Doctor, Dr. Francis Rayam.
Hi, it's Francis. I just wanted to take a minute to thank you for watching this video. If you're catching us on YouTube, please help us help others by clicking like, subscribe, and all notifications so you don't miss any videos. And check back for the next video. I think you're going to love it. Thanks again. For more information, you can visit us at hugyourmoney.com.
Welcome to Financial Fitness. I'm Jess Tyler, along with the Money Doctor, Dr. Francis Rayam. Hi.
Surprise! We had planned a totally different show for this morning, and we got into a conversation, you and I thought, you know, we really should do this if you are willing to share your story with us. So Jess and I have worked together now for, I don't know, 3-4 years, something like
3
that.
years, yeah.
It's been a while. And I know that radio is a difficult business and not unlike other things where you might have to relocate often. So Jess has relocated a lot. So I thought it would be interesting to just hear the sort of changes you've had to make in your career, where you've had to move, why, and what that does to your wallet, to your emotions. Can you give us any advice that might help people who have to relocate often?
Well, when I started off in radio, I started off at WHAI in Greenfield, Mass, doing a little bit of news. And then I got asked to go down to Springfield. The late, great Phil D. I don't know if you remember Phil D.
Sure, he was with the Wiz, which is now your pure oldie station in Greenfield.
Yeah.
With Jay Dean on it.
Phil
Absolutely.
D.
Yep.
And I worked with Jay Dean when I very first started. I used to go get his coffee at Dunkin' all the time in the morning for the morning show because I would do the overnights.
Nice
but I went
guy.
down to Springfield. Wonderful. And I was there for 10 years. And it was great because I grew up in Western Mass. I'm a Hilltown kid. I grew up in the Hilltowns. So I was in Springfield for 10 years, which was great because this is my area. This is where all my family and friends are. But then the way radio works, there's budget cuts all the time. It's just not a secure field. They can make changes. They can switch formats. Anything can happen. So I got let go in Springfield and went down to Providence for 5 years. Again, this was the first kind of big move I had made, but it was still okay because I could drive home. But I will say that's when I ran into my first financial obstacle because usually when you get hired in a new place, they'll give you somewhat of an allowance to move. They try to make it as cheap as possible. And that's when you find out, even when you're not moving that much stuff, how expensive it is to move anything. Like the pod storage, I kind of looked into that. It was so expensive. So by the time you're done moving a truck, that was 3 hours. It was a couple grand. So it gets really expensive. It gets expensive. After that, I moved to Louisville. So talk about even more expensive because you're moving further.
To Louisville,
Kentucky.
Wow.
Yeah. I was there for 5 years, then went to Detroit, Michigan, and then went to New Hampshire, and then back home.
Is that it?
So yeah,
so far.
Well, Connecticut in there too, but back home. Now where I'm close to my family and friends, which is great.
What else was in there too?
I was in Connecticut for a little bit too, but I would drive back and forth. So I would stay like in a hotel a couple days a week. But Connecticut to me is still, you know how we are. If it's like New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Maine, Connecticut, we're like, okay, that's still home.
They're close.
Yeah. So but there's a lot of things that go into it, like with finances and trying to figure out cost of living in each new place. Like you might get offered a salary that sounds amazing, but if you don't do the background work to find out what's the cost of living there, then it could really not be that great.
So I'm going to ask you to go backwards for quite a bit now. Well, not that long for you, but to when you decided you wanted to be in radio. Because what I'm thinking is that there may be young people listening to us who have decided this is their path in life, whether it's radio or something else. And maybe a parent or a loved one is saying, yeah, I don't know if that's the most stable thing. I'll use a musician as an example. You know, it's one of the common ones that people want to go into music and their parents say, you should be a lawyer. You should be a plumber. You should be a doctor because you're never going to have financial stability. So would you tell me a little bit about what that process was like for you when you were thinking about what you wanted to do for a career and somehow settled in radio?
Well, I think that for every kid that got told they talk too much in school, I think that's all the radio kids were the kids that got told that. So I wasn't really sure. I wanted to either be a lawyer because I like the debate part, or I wanted to write for Rolling Stone magazine. Like I wanted to follow the musicians around and write for Rolling Stone. Almost Famous, like my favorite movie. So I got into music and love doing music and booking shows and kind of doing all of that. So really it was to find something where I could talk for a living.
Yeah. You're just
Yeah.
making me think maybe you should just book our band. You can book my
I could
band.
do that. I
You
could do that. I did that for years and years and put together shows and booked artists and did all that stuff because
Fascinating.
I worked on music stations. Yeah.
It is really always fascinating to me to do this kind of an interview, which is really what this is. This is us learning about Jess Tyler, my co-host, and the path that you've taken to get here. So those are very interesting choices. Either a lawyer or writing for Rolling Stone magazine,
Yeah,
and you've
exactly.
come closer to one than the other, and we all know which one that is. So, what was it like to work on the country station? You worked on a country station for quite a while, right? On Wix?
Yeah, I worked at Kix and then I worked at Cat
Yes.
Country in Providence and then a country station in Louisville. I loved it because I've worked on, and I'm working on a rock station now as well, but I've worked in all different formats and country was the best as far as being able to connect listeners with their favorite artist. You'd be able to
Ah,
get artists to come and do shows, especially at the beginning of their career. So like Taylor Swift came to the station when she was 16 years old. So I've
wow.
known her for, almost 20 years now. Garth Brooks didn't come to the station, but I got to go to many events to see him. The late great Toby Keith, I got to go to his house. Keith Urban, who is probably my favorite, I got to ride in his tour bus for a week and go from show to show. I was really good friends with his record person that managed him. So we just got to ride in the tour bus and it was amazing. So I've
For
had
a
some really
week.
amazing experiences. Yeah. We
Wow.
went all the different shows. Yeah. It was
All
really
right,
fun.
let me take a side road here then for a moment because I know people watching this or listening to this will want to know that. Stories, please. What happened on a week for a week with Keith Urban on a tour bus? What kind of memories come to mind?
Oh man, I would just say that my favorite memory of it, besides the fact that he walked around with no shirt and he's the best smelling man in the world, besides that, this was when Golden Road was coming out, which is a huge album for him. And before it had come out, he played each song for us and told us like a little bit. It was just me and my friend Nancy, who was kind of his manager, and he told us about each song and
Oh,
why he wrote it. And so we got kind of like a preview before the world had heard the album. He'd probably played it for some other people, but it wasn't out yet. And so that was just an amazing memory. It was really fun. Although I don't know if I'm a curse or not because the whole band got fired after that trip and he hired a new band. So
oh,
I might be the curse, but I've got some really great pictures and some really fun memories. One of the most fun was he did Mohegan Sun, played Mohegan Sun, which is always a fun venue to go to.
yes.
And it's just really cool kind of being with the band, like sitting on the sound stage and kind of getting that experience. Yeah.
So I'm interested in this because, of course, on radio and TV, we can't smell him.
Mhm.
So you said he was the best smelling man in the world. Did you ever find out why? What he
No,
wore?
and I will say this, I'm not the only one to say this. Men and women alike say it. It's some kind of, I don't know if it's like pheromones, that's for women. I don't know what guys have, but he just smells great. And I'm sure what he has is some expensive custom-made cologne, but really guys and girls alike all say the same thing when they meet him. Not only is he a nice guy, but everybody brings up how good he smells.
Can you imagine now there's somebody listening to this who's in advertising who's saying, I need him to sponsor my cologne.
I'm telling you, and it's great that guys will say it too. They're like, "Hey, I'll
Yeah.
admit it. He smells good." And there's never a time he doesn't smell that good.
Yeah.
So it was
It,
yeah, pretty incredible.
and it may be a combination of things. Sometimes if people comment on my scent, they say, what is it? And I'll say, it's my clean cocktail. It's a perfume, it's my shampoo, it's my conditioners, whatever. It's this sort of mix of things that somehow is identifiable. Anyway,
Mhm.
so I asked you about a country station, but is the pay different between different types of stations? If you worked for a jazz station, for instance, do they pay you more or
Oh,
less to work for?
no, I wouldn't say it goes by the genre of music for sure. If it's like say a small Christian station, it might be less than like a mainstream big station, but it really goes by market size. So it
Yes.
depends what market you're in, how many listeners you have. So when I was
Yep.
in Detroit, that was a major market. That was top 10 in the whole country.
Yeah.
Here is like, like a medium sized market. But yeah, it depends on each market and it depends on each company. But the problem is there's not a ton of job stability, which I think is true in a lot of different fields. But the difference is, for example, I'll use my sister, which I do a lot. She's a nurse. So say something happened with her job, she could get a job anywhere and not have to move. But when you're
Yes.
working in radio, there's a limited number of stations, and those limited number have a limited number of positions, which are getting smaller and smaller over the years. So it's
Yeah.
much harder to find a job without moving across the country.
Yeah.
And
I
then that's
wanted,
when all the money comes in. Early on, like when I had moved from Springfield to Providence, there was like 6 months in between, and I cashed out like my 401k and then got stuck with that big 30% tax and like just things you learn along the way. Like, don't do that. At the time, I was like, okay, I've got to live on this. So I don't care about the 30%. There were probably other things I could have done, but I didn't know that at that age.
yes, I want to talk to you more about, the family situation, having to pick up kids and move, getting a divorce in the middle of all this, anything you're willing to share with our listeners
Mhm.
about how you continue to land on your feet financially, because you are very self-effacing, but I know for a fact you manage to land on your feet financially, despite
Mhm.
the fact that you always talk about your sister is good with money and you're not.
Yes, she is.
Here you
Yeah.
are with two healthy kids, well adjusted and all of that. So I would like to talk more about that. And in particular, something like when you're living in Detroit and you're getting paid more money and the market share is big, but it costs you more. Do you
Mhm.
find that that's similar in lifestyle to living in a smaller market, but having less expenses? And I really want to go into some detail about that in the second half, if we could. But just before we go to break, and folks, can you tell we've turned the tables here? Before we go to break, can you tell me if there's one more thing you'd like to say to people that are listening about if you're trying to decide on a career and somebody's
Mhm.
talking to you about money, what's your advice about that?
I mean, I think my advice would be to figure out something that you love to do and then not just say, okay, I'm going to go for that, figure out a way to get paid to do whatever that thing is. So, for example, if you love to talk, it might not be radio, but it might be a podcast. It might be a public speaker at different events. It might be you're working at a bank, but you're in charge of media and publicity, public relations. So there
Mhm.
are different ways. Like if you can figure out and identify the one thing that's not going to make you feel like you're having to go to work every day, but figure out how to get paid for it, I
Yes.
think that you're gonna win for sure.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. You can take us to break because that's your job, and then we'll come back and hear more about my co-host, Jess Tyler.
All right, well, I wanna get your phone number, of course.
Yeah, in this case, we're giving out my phone number, not Jess's.
Yes.
Although if you have questions, I will forward them to her. So my phone number is 413-773-3333 here at Hug Your Money.
Okay, you can also visit hugyourmoney.com. We'll be right back with more, I guess, of me coming up
More of
and
you
Dr.
and
Francis
money.
Ram and the Money Doctor with Financial Fitness on WHMP.
Want to know what it would feel like to be financially unburdened? Let your Hug Financial Coach help you take a load off. Do it for yourself and for those you love. Hug Your Money. So unique, it's patented.
Welcome back to Financial Fitness. I'm Jess Tyler, along with the Money Doctor, Dr. Francis Ram, and we're talking about me, which makes me nervous.
Welcome back to Financial Fitness. I'm Frances Rayham, and this is my co-host, Jess Tyler, who has graciously agreed to let us peek into her life of radio with
Mhm.
all of its financial drama, if you will, because of the turnover in radio. And I know that. I mean, we've been on the air 15 plus years, I think. And, DJs have come and gone, general managers have
Mhm.
come and gone, salespeople have come and gone, PR people come and
Yep.
go. And sometimes stations come and go. We talked about
Mhm.
Phil D, who had a station called The Wiz, an AM station called The Wiz, which the Saga
Mhm.
stations bought and have relabeled as Pure Oldies that Jay Dean is on. And, he's only the third voice for color that they've ever asked to be on that station in 40 years. But he's very
Mhm.
proud of that because that never happens. So,
Yeah.
you bring up a point. It just doesn't have to be radio. It could be anything where you have to pick up and move. Certainly military
Mhm.
personnel, they have it down. I mean, they they just
Yeah.
go. This is
They
where
can
you're
pack up
told to
quick and
go,
go and start
you
over.
go.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's harder
But
on kids
Yeah.
Definitely, especially in military families. I did not move when my son was little because I didn't want him to have to start a new school and be away from his dad. I will say I got divorced before I got into radio, so that made it easier. I didn't have to think about
Yes.
somebody else finding a job or, because you got to take that all into consideration when you're deciding to move. But
Mm.
as I said before, with radio, most of the time you're going to be required to move.
Yeah. How old are your children now?
Well, my son who's older, and then my two grandchildren who are like my kids are 5 and 6.
I can't believe you have grandchildren. Nobody who
Yeah.
sees this will believe you have grandchildren.
Well, I talk about them as like my kids all the time because they're with me all the time. So it's kind of like my second chance because I had Tyler so young.
Yeah.
So now I just have so much more patience. But when
Yeah.
Tyler was little, I didn't move. I was in Springfield for 10 years. So he grew up on the radio with me. I brought him. He was under the production room board. Gave him a little sleeping bag and a DVD player. Anytime we had any kind of like skits that involved kids, like he went back to school shopping with Shaggy and, did all the little
Oh.
stunts and stuff for us. Went on stage. He used to sign his autograph, Tyler Tyler.
Oh.
Really
Oh, that's
cute.
so
So
cute.
yeah, but then once he got older, I was able to move. But it is harder, like when you're figuring out when they're offering you a salary, you have to figure out the cost of living. You also have to figure out one thing I kind of forgot about is when you're away from home and have to fly back, how much it's going to
Mm.
cost you for airfare a couple times a year. Like all of these things affect your pocketbook a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. You have some tricks that you can share with people, like how you made ends meet when you had to.
Yeah, I will say that I've done this in almost every place that I've moved to. This is kind of my little trick that I do, especially if you can do something where it's like a 1 bedroom or a small 2 bedroom. I always like, for example, when I went to Detroit, I looked for the best zip code in Detroit that I would never be able to afford, which was Bloomfield Hills. It's kind of like
Mhm.
the rich area of Detroit, about a half an hour away from the city. So I would look in those areas and then look for like a wealthier person who had a property that had either an apartment above their garage or a little house on the property and rented that. So I lucked
Yes.
out when this happened in Louisville. This happened in Louisville twice, happened in Detroit, happened in New Hampshire. All 3 of those times I found like an in-law apartment. So everything was included in the utilities, and I
Yep.
paid one price and had like in Detroit in Bloomfield Hills, I had my own little house. It was down the end, so I never saw the people that owned the house, and I was
Yeah.
in a zip code that was a zip code I could have never afforded, and it was really great.
What a sweet deal, and what a great tip. I think most people would not think to do that. They look for apartments, they look in the ads, and they find out what's available.
Mhm.
Do you think that your rent was more affordable because, people who were well off didn't necessarily wanna capitalize on it, they just wanted somebody in the apartment? Maybe they thought, "I'm renting to a single woman with a son, this is important to us to help out, and we can do it."
Yeah, I think that if you present like, I think it didn't hurt that I was on the radio in their area so they could listen to me, they knew who I
Uh-huh.
was, and they knew it wasn't gonna be almost every place I've worked, I've done the morning show, so they knew I'm getting up at 3:30, I'm not gonna be having raging parties at 1 in the morning. So they
Yes.
felt good about that. So yeah, for sure, the little house that I rented, I paid $1,400 including everything besides cable. And could they have gotten 2 or $3,000 for that? For sure. For sure, but
Yeah,
a lot of people that are in that wealthier zip code don't wanna deal with any problems. They just wanna have it all contained. They didn't have to worry about, like, me getting the electric turned off or something
sure.
like that because the utilities are included. So,
Yeah,
yeah, every place I've gone to, I've typed in when I'm looking on the sites, carriage house or in-law suite. And if you
good.
type in those 2 things, you'll find some little secrets that pop up.
Those are
Yeah.
great. That's a great tip. Um, what's the first thing you do when you land in a new area, to get, with a child, for instance, to get your bearings and kind of get a real sense for how much money you're gonna have to spend monthly? I mean, now with the internet, you can do a lot of that in advance, but what is top priority for you when your boots hit the dirt?
Yeah. Well, I will say the only place that I moved to with my son was Providence. So in that particular instance, I made sure that it was a good school. Like I moved to the area where it would be the good school district for him.
Yeah,
Without him, which has been most of the moves, um, one of the main things, like one of the really great things about New Hampshire was there was no state income tax. So your check ended up being a lot better. So
yeah,
when you were figuring out how much the salary that factored into my decision where I maybe accepted a lower amount because I knew my take home was going to be more. I
Mhm.
don't know if that was a smart financial move or not, but just that factored in, where some other places were, not as great. So the first thing I do when I move, I should say this. The first thing I do when I move is I would go to any kind of rental site to look to see how much apartments in the good areas were going to be.
Mhm.
That's the first thing
Yeah.
I did when figuring out if am I going to be able to even afford to do this? Am I going to be able to afford to fly home when I want to reasonably, or am I going to be struggling and be away from family?
Yeah, well, you bring up a very good point about taxes. It's a thing that people ignore even when they're house shopping. They'll say, well,
Mhm.
this is how much mortgage I got approved for or pre-approved for, but they forget to
Mhm.
add in their taxes, and that puts them over a limit, and then they end up in trouble. And the same is true of renting. I mean, some states you have to pay tax on your clothing, right?
Mhm.
Whereas other
Yeah.
states you don't. Some states there's tax on food, more tax on some items than others. Excise taxes can be higher than others. Maybe your car insurance is going to cost you a lot more where you're
Mhm.
going. So
Yeah.
when we run these scenarios with young people, we teach them how to figure this out. We call it moving backwards. But it's moving backwards because what I want them to do is go on the internet, look for a place, look for Detroit, Michigan, if that's where you're going to have to move, right? Or that's where you think you
Mhm.
want to live. Then go get the statistics because they're all out there. They're all on government sites. What's the
Mhm.
starting salary for somebody in your position in Detroit, Michigan? So you get that number. Then you say, what's the average cost of renting in Detroit, Michigan? And you get that number. And that, at least the rental number or the mortgage number and your income number is a good starting point because what you're
Mhm.
looking for is all of your debt. So your mortgage or your rent, where even though technically rent isn't debt, let's call it a living expense, your mortgage or your rent, your car payment, your credit cards, anything that is debt
Mhm.
like that, you want to pay no more than 1/3 of your paycheck before
Which is
taxes.
very difficult to do right now. Yeah, it's with the
Yeah,
cost
before
of
taxes to cover that.
rent or yeah, it's a lot harder. It used to be much easier to be at that number. Now
Yeah.
I have talked to so many people that half their check goes to rent or mortgage.
Yeah, well, this is a complaint of mine from a long time because when banks approve mortgages, it's done, and it's not really the bank's fault, right? But they do it right now on paper, what the numbers look like, and then
Mhm.
things change, right? You might lose a
Yeah.
job, or the expenses might increase, inflation might be up, whatever it is, and that number that you were approved at initially no longer works. It's a moot point, and you don't get to say, well, wait, I want to pay 20% of my income for my mortgage payment. It is what it is. So I
Mhm.
think that's interesting. One thing I would ask you about right now, because groceries are so expensive right now, did you do a little recon mission? I know when I moved here, I went to like every grocery store, not just for price, but where can I shop? What can I do? Who's open the right hours? Do they have the things I want? And how are their prices? Did you do like a
Mhm.
little recon every place you went to find the stores that you liked best and factor
I
that
100% did. Like they have kind of the equivalent of an Aldi and then kind of the equivalent of a Whole Foods. So you
Yep.
kind of knew which one was going to be a little bit better pricing. The other thing that I did too, which is hard to do, especially if you're moving to a new area, you pick the places that look beautiful and that you'd love to live in. So, for example, in New Hampshire, I would have loved to live in Portsmouth on the water, but I ended up picking Dover, which is still expensive, but it's not Portsmouth on the water expensive. So
Yes.
you might have to kind of drive around the area and figure out like, yes, I would love to live here, but I'm going to be so tight. It's not going to be a fun place to live. I'm not going to be able to go out and do anything and explore. So that's kind of hard when you kind of have your head set on this is my dream location or dream house or apartment,
Yeah.
to really kind of be honest with yourself about
Yeah.
what's life going to be like living there with no money.
That's a very important point because if the reason you're doing this is to have, a better life, and you're so strapped you can't have a cup of coffee, excuse me, you're not going to feel very good about it.
Mhm.
That's another good example. Now, I live in Montague City, 8 houses from the Greenfield line in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
So my taxes are about half of what they are in Greenfield. Now, I don't
Mhm.
have children, so the school system wasn't a factor for me or anything. I just found a house on the water that I liked and said, that's an affordable price for me. But it's a big difference in taxes from me to
Mhm.
8 houses away. And yet I still have the same proximity to, the major routes that I want to get on because it's convenient, all of that. I happen to have a house that backs up to the Connecticut River here, whereas in Greenfield, I might not be able to afford that or get that or want that. So
Mhm.
I think proximity and being flexible is really important, but that's probably the key point. And I want you to um, talk about this a little bit if you could before we end. When you have a job like you have,
Mhm.
first of all, were you aware going into it how much you might have to move? And secondly, what does flexible mean to you? How do you decide what you have to do?
Um, First question, no. I didn't think I would have to move this much. I kind of thought if you're good at your job and, you'll keep that job, but that's just not the way this business works. So flexible for me was, am I willing to move somewhere on my own? You kind of have to make a whole new set of friends. Um, you have to kind of adjust to not being around for every event at home or be able to go to things anymore or have that person that you like to go to things with. Like I like to bring my sister to stuff. And I couldn't do that unless she flew out to see me. So you kind of have to adjust that. Right now, kind of a big reason why I'm back home, I've been offered other jobs or, other places in the country, but it's do I want to give up being around family right now at this point in my life versus when I was 25? And
Mhm.
right now it's a no. I'd rather be here and not miss out on the things where maybe I'm not doing exactly what I want to be doing as far as booking concerts and doing all that kind of fun stuff anymore, but I'm still doing something that I love, and I have the benefit of being around my family right now.
Yeah. Every time we talk, Jess, you say something that causes me to make a comment that is something I never thought I would say on the air at that moment,
Oh
right?
boy.
Every show is almost always a surprise. But you just brought out the financial coach in me with that statement about, well, I moved here for all these emotional reasons and I could come home and make a living. But I really, I had to give up doing all that fun stuff like booking concerts. And the financial coach in me immediately was like, no, no, you don't have to give that up. Let's talk about that. And I really,
Yeah.
when we get off the air, we really should talk about this because I think you could be doing both things. And if that
Mhm.
would bring you enjoyment, it would certainly help out a lot of other people and put more cash in your pocket. That could be a big win-win for you. And I
Yeah.
didn't know that you had that much experience at it, but clearly you do. And even if you didn't, if you were just a client that I was talking to who said, I had to give up something I really loved to do
Mhm.
to be able to move here, I would say, well, why? I mean, can we, maybe you have to be flexible again, right? Maybe you
Right.
don't book Taylor Swift, but maybe you book, some local bands that are really hot or something, and
Right.
that's enough for you. But but yeah, the all or nothing thing is difficult. And I know that you value your sister very much. So in closing, I just would like to hear just one comment you have about your sister.
Oh gosh, in regard to what? Just anything?
Anything you want.
I will say that she is kind of the glue that keeps the family together. We lost both our parents, my dad very young and my mom, about 15 years ago. And she's kind of kept everybody together, although it's a little bit more tough love. I like a little more soft love, a little more tough love from her. But I will say, if you've got somebody in your life that will pick up whatever you're doing and, move you to a different city or help you out if you need a plane ticket home, value that because
Mm.
it's just a good thing.
Yeah, thank you. We always talk about money, but in closing, I'm going to just say the same thing I say all the time. Money is a means to an end. It isn't that it isn't important, but it
Mhm.
should, in my opinion, be used to afford you the things that are important in life to you.
I hope this was interesting for people, and I hope I didn't bore them.
I doubt that anybody was bored, but I thank you very much for doing it because we really did have a totally different show planned. But when
We did.
inspiration strikes, you just do it. So thank you,
Awesome. All
Jess
right, well, let me
Tyler.
get your phone number. You're welcome. Let me get your phone number,
Sure, it's 413-773-3333.
and you can visit hugyourmoney.com too for more information, and I think we're gonna have questions next week, right?
We have questions this week, but we'll do them next week. You bet.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jess. Would you like to see your business on Financial Fitness with the Money Doctor? We offer a 15-year proven track record. We have limited openings, but are currently seeking sponsors and guests. Is your business a good fit? We'd like to start a conversation. Contact us today at 413-773-3333 or info@hugyourmoney.com.